Hello everyone. A majority of you have expressed support for Carcassonne on social media. And so I will tell you its legendary story, then its history as presented by historians today whose names you will find in the description. The medieval city of Carcassonne, spreading over 10 hectares and thus sometimes considered today as the largest medieval city in Europe. A version of a fascinating and mysterious legend about its name, which allows us to travel back in time to distant centuries. Here is a version that I took the liberty of adjusting so that it is coherent, and Mari will tell it to you. So listen.
It's the 9th century AD. Carcassonne and its region were ruled by the Muslim king Balak and his wife, Lady Carcasse, after the Islamic invasions of the previous century. It was in these troubled times that Emperor Charlemagne actively sought to take the city and to do so, planned to lay siege to Carcassonne. The Franks gathered their troops and set out with the firm intention of capturing the city. The Saracen king, having been informed of the arrival of the Frankish emperor, then set out to meet him with his men in order to put an end to the threat. A few hours were enough for Balak and his companions. The Franks were now in sight. Their decisive moment came. Conquer or perish to keep control of the city. Armies positioned themselves before attacking each other. The clash was brutal, but Balak and his warriors were soundly defeated and all perished in a terrible melee. Not having defeated they have, and so the city of Carcassonne found itself at the mercy of Charlemagne, now able to besiege it as he pleased. That was without counting on King Balak's wife, Lady Carcasse, who did not lose heart and decided to intervene with firmness and determination. The latter thus managed to hold the city, which was now besieged for 5 long years. These harsh times for the city had caused a terrible famine, taking the lives of many of the city's defenders. The situation was becoming critical, but behind the city walls, lonely and weakened, Lady Carcasse kept watch and devised a ruse. In the absence of enough defenders, she set up straw dummies and fired crossbow bolts at the besieging army to make them believe there were still many defenders ready to fight. Nevertheless, the reality was far harsher for Lady Carcasse and her subjects. In the city, there was nothing left to eat or drink, except for a little pig and a measure of wheat, not enough to meet the basic needs of the remaining population. Then Lady Carcasse had a new idea. She fed the poor pig with the remaining wheat. Strange idea, thought the villagers. Had she lost her mind? But they were not done being surprised. As the stuffed and staggering piglet tried to walk away, Lady Carcasse grabbed the animal and threw it over the rampart. Madness, thought the townspeople. When it hit the ground, the poor pig burst open and from its torn belly spilled a stream of good grain. The Franks, having witnessed the strange spectacle, couldn't believe it. How was it possible? 5 years of siege? And now their enemies, apparently still numerous, were still able to feed the pigs and even get rid of them just to taunt them. Charlemagne, being pragmatic, then lifted this siege that had lasted too long and seemed pointless to him. The Franks broke camp. Victory for Lady Carcasse, who watched the departure of the great Frankish army with a broad smile. But before they vanished, Lady Carcasse, triumphant, sounded the horns to remind the emperor of her victory. She could now hope to keep the city under her responsibility while avoiding a new conflict and another inevitable military campaign by the Franks. As the horns of the city echoed, one of Charlemagne's companions turned to the emperor and said, "Lord Carcasse is sounding." Then the emperor, understanding the call, turned back and allowed Lady Carcasse to keep the city in exchange for her allegiance. And that's how the city became Carcassonne.
Thank you, Marie. This well-told legend is simply a beautiful story. The origin of the city is a Gallic oppidum built in the 6th century before Christ on the hill where the majestic city still stands today. This latter has had a rather eventful history and has changed hands regularly. It was first fortified over the centuries. until the Romans took control in 118 before Christ, slowly transforming. But surely the Oppidum into a Gallo-Roman city that would be called Carcasse. Does that ring a bell? Oh yes, unfortunately. For our legendary Lady Carcasse, Carcassonne's origins date back many centuries, long before Islam or Charlemagne. Afterwards, the city developed and benefited from the Pax Romana, that is, the Roman peace enjoyed by the regions controlled by the Roman Empire, for about 200 years. By the late 3rd century, and especially in the 4th century, AD unrest frequently shook the Roman Empire, prompting local leaders to build the first stone fortifications around the city. Some of these fortifications are still visible today. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, especially under the pressure of the great barbarian invasions, the Visigoths settled in the region and held the city without any prolonged interruption. This continued despite frequent conflicts until the Visigothic kingdom suddenly fell due to the Islamic invasion of Spain. It was initially intended as a raid until the weakness of the Visigothic kingdom was revealed. In 725 AD, the city was under caliphate control for 27 years. Starting in 752 AD, Pipin the Short, son of Charles Martel and father of Charlemagne, captured the city and fully conquered Septimania. 6 years later, in 759, the legend of Lady Carcasse, born in the 12th century from the creativity of the troubadours, would be very loosely inspired by this episode. The city gained its familiar shape during the Middle Ages. At the end of the 11th century, the Trinquevel dynasty, which greatly influenced the city's history, gained control through a strategic marriage. A certain Bernard Aton IV, Trinquevel, ruling over Albi and Nîmes, which he inherited from his father, Raymond Bernard Trinquevel, inherited the viscounties of Carcassonne and Béziers from his mother. The city experienced a certain growth under the reign of the Trinquevel, marked by numerous conflicts, as was so common in the Middle Ages. The Cathedral of Carcassonne was built in the late 11th century, and the current castle was started in the 12th century. It was adapted over time by lords to serve different needs. By the late 12th century, Catharism, a dissident Christian movement that emerged in Western Europe around 1000, was gaining momentum in present-day Languedoc. Assisted by the permissive stance of the Count of Toulouse and his vassal, Raymond Roger Trinquevel, Viscount of Carcassonne, Razé, Albi, Viollet, and Béziers. Although they were Catholics, they showed tolerance towards the Cathars and even the Jews, who were also often terribly mistreated in the Middle Ages. The term Cathar comes from the Greek katharos, meaning clean or pure. Without delving into the interesting Cathar spirituality, since this is about history, Catharism is inspired by Christianity, but introduces ideas that differ significantly from Catholicism, which was the dominant branch of Christianity in the West at the time, and at the head of which was the Pope. You should know that by this time we are far removed from the early centuries of Christianity, and truly starting from the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, one of whose goals was to regulate and define what Christianity was, many interests other than spiritual ones became attached to the faith of Christians. As a result, different groups' ideas and the main players' conflicting political interests eventually clashed. Multiple peaceful efforts to reconvert the Cathars failed, mainly due to lack of support from local lords who saw them as no threat. As I mentioned to you earlier, in 1208, Pope Innocent III eventually lost patience and became concerned about the rise of what was considered heresy, and calls for a crusade against the Cathars, as well as against the lords who protect them, or should we say who tolerate them, even if they are Catholic. The northern lords of the Kingdom of France answer the call and gather a large army. The Count of Toulouse, aware of the danger and pragmatic, quickly makes amends. But that won't be the case for Trinquevel, who, despite reaffirming his loyalty to the Catholic faith, can't find a mutually acceptable agreement. In July 1209, the siege of Béziers begins and the city quickly falls after a sortie by its people. It ended in disaster, followed by a massacre of the city's population. During the siege, Papal Legate Arnaud Amaury reportedly said, "Kill them all, God will recognize his own," which, by the way, was probably never actually said, as the assault was launched by the troops without receiving any such order. and out of opportunism in response to the failed sortie by the people of Viterbo. As a result of the fall of the city, the chaos was such that the Crusader knights had to turn against their own troops in order to restore order and put an end to the violence and the sacking of the city. The following month, in August 1209, Carcassonne, defended by Viscount Trinquevel himself, is besieged by the Crusaders. After learning Béziers' fate, the city surrendered in 15 days. In return, the Crusaders agreed to spare the locals, who were less resilient than the famed Lady Carcasse. The inhabitants are expelled, nearby villages burned, and Trinquevel imprisoned. His lands are seized and later granted to Simon de Montfort, Count of Montfort-l'Amaury, and of Leicester, who was a warrior both brilliant, ambitious, and brutal. The crusade continues to rage on and will last for several more years. A key moment in the crusade was the 1213 Battle of Muret, won by Simon de Montfort. He died in battle in 1218 during the siege of Toulouse. Amaury de Montfort, his son, reclaimed Carcassonne. Unfortunately for him, he struggled to hold on to the city. In 1224, he gave up his rights to it in favor of King Louis VIII of France. Lion taking advantage of Amaury de Montfort's departure, the Trincavels tried to regain a foothold, and it was Raymond II Trinquevel who managed to regain effective control of the city. The return was brief. In 1226, the King of France joined the ongoing crusade to finally end Languedoc. He had acknowledged periods of calm. Louis VIII, called the Lion, and later Louis IX, who became Saint Louis, left Carcassonne and reinforced its defenses. By order of St. Louis, the second wall of the city was built, and it was tested as early as 1240 against, guess who? Raymond Vax Trinquevel, who clearly wouldn't give up. However, the defenses held, and Raymond Trinquevel had to permanently give up these titles. The city's defenses were continually improved afterward, ensuring that no one would dare to besiege the citadel again. Until the end of the Middle Ages, sometimes at the expense of nearby towns, including during the 100 Years' War. Afterward, the city endured the 16th century religious wars and maintained its military role. In the 17th century, the citadel of Carcassonne declined as surrounding towns became better suited for growth and the era's new realities. Over the years, the upper town slowly lost its residents and institutions. Consequently, the walls and castle gradually deteriorated from neglect. Neglect of the citadel in the 19th century led to plans for its destruction. Fortunately, it did not happen, and after a few twists and turns, it was restored. Starting in 1853 by the architect Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, who left his interpretation of the city's history and his personal touch. All this was approved by Napoleon III, and the city was later protected as a historical monument. In 1862, that's how the city of Carcassonne has come down to us, continuing its history alongside us, rich in both its past and its present. Thank you too. All of you who follow us, I hope this made you want to discover or rediscover the city. If that's the case, don't forget to subscribe and give the video a thumbs up. Tell me in the comments what, in your opinion, makes Carcassonne such a special place in French historical heritage. As you know, I read all the comments I get with great interest. I'd also like to take this opportunity to tell you about a great project I've joined. We are history-focused video creators aiming to create a label that offers visibility and quality, as well as giving lesser-known or beginner video creators the opportunity to get noticed if their work meets certain quality standards, both in content and in form. This label's charter has two key elements that matter to me and will receive my close attention. The first point is that every video creator benefiting from the label must share the sources they use and present an approach that is both serious and apolitical, or if not, clearly show their bias. You'll learn more soon on the channel's social media. Links are in the description. Another announcement, as you know, you can support the channel via Typee or Utip. Support that becomes even more important since I wanted to change the way the channel operates. Going forward, my team will be paid for every illustration or task completed for the channel, and no longer afterwards based on the income and tips you honor us with, as was the case until now. In order to continue creating, it is therefore essential to have enough funds before being able to start the required work. For the creation of a video, I would also like to remind you that the hard work I have done and continue to do is still entirely voluntary to this day. In fact, I also have a full-time professional job which is very demanding in terms of energy. All of the funds received have been distributed to the people who worked with me or have been invested in the development of the channel. I thank you in advance for any contribution you make to us, whether it's a like, a comment, a tip, or anything else. All links are in the description. See you soon.